The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Wyoming plains, driving sheets of snow sideways through the darkening sky. Ella Grace McCallan pulled her worn wool coat tighter around her shoulders, though it did little good against the bite of the storm. Her mare, Buttercup, snorted and shook her head, ice forming on her dark mane with each labored breath.
"Just a little further, girl,"
Ella murmured, her voice barely audible above the wind, her hands, roughened by years of needlework and hard living, gripped the reins with determination, those same hands that had stitched countless garments, mended torn dreams, and held together what little dignity she had left. She'd been riding since dawn, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the life she'd fled in Cheyenne. 28 years old, taller than most women and stronger than her father had ever given her credit for. She'd finally found the courage to run. The marriage contract he'd arranged with Cornelius Whitmore, a man 3 times her age with hands that grabbed too freely, lay unsigned and abandoned on her father's mahogany desk. The storm had come on sudden, the way they did in these parts. One moment the sky had been merely gray and brooding. The next it had opened up with a fury that turned the world white and hostile. Ella knew better than to be caught out in weather like this. She'd heard too many stories of folks found frozen solid come spring thaw, their last expressions preserved in ice. Cedar Hollow, that's what the last homesteader had said, back when she could still see more than 10 feet ahead. "There's a way station at Cedar Hollow, about 15 miles northwest. If you ride hard, you might make it before the worst hits." But the worst had already hit, and Ella couldn't tell northwest from up anymore. The landscape she'd been following, the distinctive red rocks and scattered juniper, had vanished behind a curtain of white. Even Buttercup seemed lost, her usual sure footing becoming tentative, questioning. Ella's fingers had gone numb inside her leather gloves. Her face felt like someone had taken a wire brush to it, and she could no longer feel her toes in her boots. Fear crept in alongside the cold, whispering that she'd traded one fate for another. At least marrying Cornelius would have been a slow death. This would be quicker, but no less final. Through the swirling snow, something dark loomed ahead. At first, Ella thought it might be her eyes playing tricks, or worse, the beginning of that dangerous sleep that claimed folks in blizzards. But no, there it was again. A shape, solid, real. A fence post. Her heart jumped. Where there were fence posts, there were ranches. Where there were ranches, there might be shelter. She urged Buttercup forward, following the line of posts that appeared and disappeared like ghosts in the storm. Then, "Blessed be," a sign materialized out of the white void. The wood was weathered and the letters were faded, but she could just make out the words burned into the grain: Mackenzie Ranch, shelter welcome. Shelter welcome. 2 words that might as well have been a prayer answered. The fence line led to a gate, standing open as if expecting her. Beyond it, she could barely discern the outline of buildings, a barn, some outbuildings, and what looked to be a modest cabin with a stone chimney. No smoke rose from it that she could see, but in this wind, smoke would be torn away before it could climb. Buttercup needed no encouragement now. The mare sensed shelter and quickened her pace, heading straight for the barn. Ella didn't fight her. The horse's instincts had kept them both alive more than once. The barn door was secured but not locked. Ella slid from the saddle, her legs nearly buckling as her frozen feet hit the ground. She wrestled with the door, finally getting it open wide enough to lead Buttercup inside. The sudden absence of wind felt like stepping into another world. Inside, the barn was tidy and well kept. Empty stalls lined one side, with fresh straw visible even in the dim light. Tools hung in orderly rows. This was a working ranch, not some abandoned homestead. Someone lived here. Someone who kept their welcome sign up even in weather that would drive most folks to bar their doors. Ella's hands shook as she unsaddled Buttercup and rubbed her down as best she could with straw. There was water in a barrel, not frozen solid, and she broke the thin ice on top so the mare could drink. Her saddlebags held some oats. which she poured into a feed bucket she found hanging on a nail.
You rest now,
she whispered to the horse.
You did good, girl. You got us here.
But where was here? Exactly, and more importantly, who was the Mackenzie whose ranch promised shelter? Ella stood in the barn doorway, peering through the snow toward the cabin. Light flickered in one window, candlelight or lamplight, warm and inviting. Someone was home. The question was whether that someone would honor the promise of their sign. She had no choice but to find out. The cold had settled so deep in her bones that she knew she wouldn't last the night in the barn, no matter how much better it was than the open prairie. Taking a deep breath that burned her lungs, she plunged back into the storm. The distance between barn and cabin couldn't have been more than 50 yards, but it felt like miles. The wind pushed her sideways, then pulled her forward, like it was playing some cruel game. She stumbled twice, caught herself, kept moving. The light in the window became her North Star, the only fixed point in a world gone white and wild. The cabin door was solid wood, reinforced with iron fixtures. Ella raised her fist to knock, then hesitated. Once she knocked, there would be no taking it back. She'd be at the mercy of whoever answered. But then, wasn't she already at the mercy of the storm? At least with a person. She might negotiate. With nature, there was no bargaining. She knocked, once, twice, 3 times, hard enough to be heard over the wind. For a long moment, nothing. Then footsteps, heavy and measured, the sound of a bolt being drawn back. The door opened, not all the way, but enough. The man who stood there filled the door frame, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a thick leather vest over a wool shirt. Dark hair fell past his collar, and his face was all angles and shadows in the dim light behind him. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as the storm itself, taking in everything about her in one long, measuring look. He didn't speak, didn't ask her name or her business, just stepped aside, holding the door open wider. Ella didn't need a second invitation. She stumbled past him into the warmth of the cabin, and heard the door close firmly behind her, shutting out the howling wind and the killing cold. For the first time in hours, maybe for the first time in years, she was safe. Or so she hoped. The warmth hit Ella like a physical thing, making her skin prickle and her eyes water. She stood just inside the door, dripping melting snow onto the worn plank floor, trying to make sense of her surroundings through vision still blurred from the storm. The cabin was modest but well built, with thick log walls chinked tight against the weather. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling behind an iron grate, casting dancing shadows across the room. The furniture was simple, a table and 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the fire, shelves lined with supplies and books. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone but lived well, taking care with what he had. The man Mackenzie, she assumed, moved past her to a row of hooks near the door. He took down a heavy blanket and held it out to her without a word. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, like someone who'd learned not to waste motion.
Thank you,
Ella managed through chattering teeth. Her voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable as her own. He nodded once, then moved to the fireplace where a kettle hung on an iron arm. The smell of coffee filled the cabin, mixing with wood smoke and something else, leather and gun oil, and the indefinable scent of a working man's space. Ella wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, but it wasn't enough. Her coat was soaked through, her dress beneath it not much better. She stood there shivering, unsure what to do next, in all her planning for escape. She'd never thought past the leaving. Certainly hadn't planned on needing the charity of strangers. "You'll catch your death standing there," the man said. His voice was deep, roughened like he didn't use it much. "There's dry clothes in the chest by the bed. They'll be too big, but they're warm." He turned his back, busying himself at the stove, giving her privacy without making a show of it. It was such a simple courtesy, yet it nearly undid her. When was the last time a man had shown her consideration without expecting something in return? The chest held men's clothing shirts, trousers, wool socks, everything clean and neatly folded. Ella's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, clumsy with cold. It took 3 tries to get her boots off, and when she finally did, she bit back a cry. Her toes were white as bone, edged with an angry red that promised pain when feeling returned. She changed quickly, rolling up sleeves and trouser legs, tying the pants with a length of rope she found in the chest. The wool shirt fell nearly to her knees. She must look ridiculous, but she was warm, and that was all that mattered. When she turned back, the man had set 2 cups on the table along with a bottle of whiskey. He poured a measure into each cup, then added coffee from the kettle. Steam rose between them like a peace offering. "Drink," he said, pushing 1 cup toward her. "It'll help with the shaking." Ella sat carefully, still wrapped in the blanket. The first sip burned, but it was a good burn, spreading warmth from her throat to her belly. She looked up at him over the cup, finally able to study the man who'd taken her in without question. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 35, though his face had the weathered look of someone who'd seen hard years. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, old and white against sun-darkened skin. His hands around the coffee cup were scarred to knife work, rope burns, the everyday damage of ranch life. But they were steady hands, capable. "I need shelter just for the night," Ella said, finding her voice. "I can pay. I have a little money." "Keep it." He cut her off without heat. "Sign says shelter welcome, doesn't say nothing about payment." "But storm like this." He glanced toward the window where snow pelted the glass like handfuls of sand. "This'll blow for 3 days minimum. Seen it before. Temperatures dropping too. By morning, it'll be cold enough to freeze spit before it hits the ground." 3 days. Ella's heart sank. 3 days was too long. Her father would have men out looking by then, though even he wouldn't send them into a storm like this. Still, 3 days in close quarters with a stranger, depending on his continued goodwill. "I won't be any trouble," she said quietly. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his gray eyes. "Ma'am, you near froze to death on my doorstep. Trouble's already come and gone." He stood, moving to a cupboard near the stove. "You hungry got stew from yesterday? Nothing fancy, but it's filling." Ella's stomach answered before she could, growling loudly enough to be heard over the fire. When had she last eaten breakfast in Cheyenne? Before dawn, a lifetime ago. Mackenzie ladled stew into a bowl, thick with meat and potatoes and carrots. The smell made her mouth water. He set it before her with a spoon and a chunk of bread, then returned to his own chair, giving her space to eat without watching. The stew was simple but good, flavored with herbs she couldn't identify. The bread was a day old, but still soft enough to soak up the gravy. Ella ate slowly, partly from manners, partly because her stomach had clenched tight from cold and fear. "Your horse in the barn?" Mackenzie asked after a while. "Yes, I rubbed her down, gave her water and feed. I hope that was all right." "It's fine. I'll check on her later. Make sure she's settled. What's her name?" "Buttercup." Ella felt foolish saying it. Such a frivolous name for such desperate circumstances. But Mackenzie just nodded. "Had a mare named Daisy once. Best cutting horse I ever rode. Nothing wrong with a flower name for a good horse." It was the longest string of words he'd spoken yet. Ella found herself relaxing fractionally. A man who named his horse Daisy couldn't be all bad. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind screamed like something alive and angry. But inside the cabin was an island of calm, warm and solid, and unexpectedly safe. "What's your name?" Mackenzie asked suddenly. "Seems like I should know, seeing as you'll be here a spell." Ella hesitated. Her full name might mean something, might connect her to her father and the life she'd fled. But lying didn't sit right. not to a man who'd shown her kindness. "Ella," she said finally. "Ella Grace." If he noticed she'd left off her surname, he didn't comment. "Daniel Mackenzie," he offered in return. "Most folks just call me Mackenzie." "Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie, for the shelter, for—" She gestured at the clothes, the food, the simple fact of being alive and warm. "No need for thanks, or for the Mr. Just Mackenzie is fine." He rose, collecting her empty bowl. "You should rest. Take the bed. I'll bunk by the fire." "I couldn't. I have imposed enough." "Ma'am Ella." Her name sounded different in his rough voice, softer somehow. "You were half dead when you knocked. You need proper rest. The bed's yours for the duration." He moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out blankets and a pillow. The matter was settled. His tone said, no argument would be entertained. Ella stood slowly. Her feet had begun to thaw, sending needles of pain with each step. The bed was in the corner, a simple wooden frame with a thick straw mattress and a pile of quilts. It looked like heaven. "Mackenzie." She turned back to find him arranging blankets on the floor. "Why keep the sign up, shelter welcome? In a place this remote, you must get all sorts." He was quiet long enough she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Had a sister once, got caught in a storm. No place to go. Someone took her in. No questions asked. Saved her life." His voice roughened further. "Figured it was a debt worth paying forward." There was more to the story. Ella could tell. Something in the past tense, in the careful way he spoke of his sister. But she didn't pry. Everyone had their ghosts. She lay down fully clothed, pulling the quilts to her chin. They smelled of cedar and smoke and safety. Through heavy lids, she watched Mackenzie settle by the fire, his back against the wall, a rifle within easy reach. He didn't trust her completely, then that was wise. She didn't entirely trust him either, but for tonight, trust was less important than warmth, less vital than the simple animal comfort of being out of the storm. The wind howled, the fire crackled, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Ella Grace let herself rest. Ella woke to gray light filtering through frosted windows and the sound of wood being added to the fire. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was, the bed too soft, the room too warm. Then memory rushed back the storm, the ranch, the taciturn man who'd given her shelter. She lay still, watching through barely opened eyes as Mackenzie moved about the cabin. He worked quietly, efficiently, stoking the fire, filling the kettle, setting coffee to brew. There was something almost ritualistic in his movements, a man accustomed to solitude and his own rhythms. The storm still raged outside, though perhaps with less fury than the night before. Snow had piled against the windows, turning them into walls of white that blocked out the world beyond. They might have been the last two people on Earth for all the isolation it created. "Coffee's ready," Mackenzie said without turning. So he'd known she was awake. Ella shouldn't have been surprised a man living alone in this wilderness would need sharp senses to survive. She sat up slowly, aware suddenly of her appearance. Her hair had come loose from its pins during the night, falling in dark tangles around her shoulders. The borrowed clothes hung shapeless on her frame, but vanity seemed foolish given the circumstances. "Thank you," she said, voice still rough with sleep. Mackenzie poured 2 cups, setting one on the table before returning to the stove. He'd started something in a skillet bacon by the smell of it, and her stomach responded with interest, despite the awkwardness of the situation. Ella made her way to the table, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. In daylight, she could see the cabin more clearly. Everything was neat, ordered, but there were no personal touches, no photographs, no mementos. Nothing to say who Daniel Mackenzie was beyond a man who lived alone and liked his solitude. "Did you sleep?" she asked, needing to fill the silence. "Some." He flipped the bacon with practiced ease. "Storms make for light sleeping, too much noise." That was true enough. though Ella suspected he'd have slept light regardless, with a stranger in his home. She sipped the coffee strong and black and perfect for cutting through the morning chill. "I should check on Buttercup after breakfast," she said. "Already did. Your horse is fine. Gave her fresh water and more feed." He glanced at her briefly. Smart animal. She found good shelter in that storm. The kindness of it, caring for her horse without being asked, made something tight in Ella's chest loosen a fraction. You didn't have to do that. Horse can't tend itself. He said it matter of fact, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Maybe for him it was. He brought 2 plates to the table bacon, fried bread, and beans. Simple fare. But Ella couldn't remember the last meal that had looked so good. They ate in companionable silence. The only sounds the clink of forks on tin plates and the wind testing the cabin walls. After breakfast, Ella insisted on washing the dishes. It was something to do with her hands, some small way to repay his hospitality. Mackenzie didn't argue, just showed her where things went and left her to it. The day stretched before them, trapped by the storm with nothing to do but wait it out. Ella had never been good at idleness. Her hands needed work, had always needed work. It was how she'd survived her father's house, keeping busy, keeping her mind occupied with stitches and seams instead of the life closing in around her. "Do you have any mending needs doing?" she asked suddenly. Mackenzie looked up from the harness he was oiling. "Mending. Clothes, blankets, anything torn." She held up her hands. "These might look rough, but they know their way around a needle." He studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes seeming to see more than she'd intended to show. Then he rose and went to a basket in the corner, returning with an armful of clothing. "Been meaning to get to these," he said, setting them on the table. "But my hands aren't made for fine work." "Fine work?" Ella almost laughed. There was nothing fine about the repairs needed torn seams, missing buttons, a jacket with the lining coming loose. But it was work, and she was grateful for it. Mackenzie produced a sewing kit from somewhere, better stocked than she'd expected. Good needles, strong thread, even spare buttons sorted into a tin. Someone had kept house here once. Someone who understood the necessity of maintaining what you had. She settled into the rocking chair by the fire, spreading the first shirt across her lap. The rhythm came back immediately, threading the needle, finding the line of the tear, making small, even stitches that would hold. Her hands remembered even when her mind wanted to wander. Mackenzie returned to his harness work, but she felt him watching her sometimes. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, just observing. Like he was trying to figure out what kind of woman knew her way around both a needle and a horse, who ran into storms instead of away from them. "You do this for a living?" he asked after a while. "The sewing?" "Sometimes." Ella kept her eyes on her work. Took in mending and alterations, made dresses for women who could afford them. She paused, then added, "It was honest work." Never said it wasn't. The shirt was finished. She folded it carefully and reached for the next item, a pair of trousers with the knee worn through. This would need a patch, and she sorted through the scrap bag he'd provided until she found a suitable piece. "Most women would use a darning egg for that," Mackenzie observed. "Most women have darning eggs." Ella spread the trouser leg flat, positioning the patch. "I learned to make do without." "Your family poor?" The question was blunt, but not unkind. Still, Ella's hands stilled on the fabric. How to answer that her family had money, too much money, in her opinion. It had bought her father power and influence, and the belief that he could sell his daughter like livestock. "No," she said finally, "just practical." In knee, Mackenzie made a sound that might have been acceptance or disbelief, but he didn't press. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows in their frames. "This normal for September?" Ella asked, needing to change the subject. "Nothing's normal anymore." Mackenzie set aside the harness, stretching muscles gone stiff from hunching over the work. Weather's been changing. Summer's hotter. Winter's coming earlier. Old-timers say it's the land's way of reminding us we're just visitors.
You believe that?
He shrugged. I believe the land does what it wants, and we either adapt or die. Cheerful thought, but Ella supposed he was right. The land didn't care about her troubles or his solitude. It just was. Vast and indifferent and beautiful in its harshness. She finished the patch, tested the strength of her stitches. They'd hold. They always held. If there was one thing Ella knew how to do, it was hold things together that wanted to fall apart. The pile of mending dwindled as the day wore on. Ella found herself settling into the rhythm of it, the simple pleasure of making something whole again. Mackenzie worked on various tasks, oiling leather, sharpening knives, small repairs that spoke of a man who took care of his possessions. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people who understood that words weren't always necessary, that sometimes just sharing space was enough. As afternoon faded toward evening, Ella realized she'd relaxed in a way she hadn't in years. No one here expected anything of her beyond what she chose to give. No one was measuring her worth in terms of marriage prospects or social standing. She was just Ella, mending clothes by a fire while a storm raged outside. "You're good at that," Mackenzie said suddenly. She looked up to find him watching her hands as she worked a particularly tricky repair on a jacket cuff. "Years of practice." "No." He shook his head slightly. "I mean, you're good at making things last. Not everyone has that skill." There was something in his voice, some weight to the words that suggested he meant more than just the sewing. But before Ella could respond, he was up and moving toward the stove, asking about supper preferences as if he hadn't just offered what might have been the first genuine compliment she'd received in years. She bent back to her work, but a warmth had settled in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the walls. Inside, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Ella felt something dangerously close to safe. The second morning brought no relief from the storm, but it did bring a problem. Mackenzie had gone to the barn early to tend the animals, returning with a saddle draped over his shoulder, her saddle, with a broken stirrup leather dangling uselessly. "Must have happened when your horse spooked," he said, setting it on the floor near the door. "Leather's torn clean through." Ella knelt beside it, running her fingers along the break. It was bad, the kind of damage that would need proper repair, not just a quick field fix. Without it, she couldn't ride, storm or no storm. "I can pay for the repair," she started, but Mackenzie was already shaking his head. "Nothing to pay for. I've got leather and tools. Just needs doing." He moved to a storage closet she hadn't noticed before, returning with an armload of supplies, leather strips, rivets, heavy thread, tools she recognized but had never used. He spread everything out on the table, then paused, looking at the torn stirrup leather with the same focus he'd given everything else. His hands moved over the damage, assessing, planning. Ella watched, fascinated despite herself, those hands scarred and weathered as they were moved with surprising delicacy as they measured and cut. When he began working the leather, she noticed how he held the needle, the angle all wrong for proper stitching. "You're going to break that thread," she said before she could stop herself. Mackenzie looked up, one eyebrow raised. "That's so." "The angle, you're putting too much stress on it. Here." She reached for the needle, then stopped, suddenly aware of her presumption. "That is, if you don't mind." He held out the work without comment. Their fingers brushed in the transfer, and Ella felt a jolt of something awareness, maybe, or just the shock of human contact after so long avoiding it. The leather was thick, much harder to work than fabric, but the principle was the same, finding the right angle, the proper tension, making stitches that would hold weight in weather. Her fingers found their rhythm quickly. "You've done this before," Mackenzie observed. "My mother taught me young, said a woman should know how to mend more than just cloth." Ella kept her eyes on the work, the memories threatening to surface. She grew up on a farm in Missouri. Practical woman.
She's still in Missouri. She's dead.
The words came out flat, matter of fact. Lung fever, 10 years back. I'm sorry. Ella shrugged, a gesture that encompassed years of grief compressed into something manageable. It was quick, at least she didn't linger. She'd finished one side of the repair. Mackenzie showed her how to set the rivets, holding the leather steady while she hammered them home. It was satisfying work, different from the delicate needlework she was used to. Stronger, more permanent.
Your turn,
she said, handing back the stirrup.
I've shown you the stitch. You finish the other side.
He took it, positioning his hands the way she'd demonstrated. The needle still looked awkward in his grip, too small for fingers used to rope and reins. But he persevered, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration like a schoolboy with his letters. There, he said after a particularly successful stitch.
Not so hard after all.
Only took you 3 tries to get it right. Was that a smile tugging at his mouth, just a slight upturn? There and gone. But Ella found herself oddly pleased to have caused it. They worked in companionable partnership. Ella coaching him through the trickier parts. Mackenzie teaching her about leather grain and why you cut with it. Never against. The stirrup repair grew stronger with each stitch, each rivet, until it looked like it might outlast the saddle itself. This is good work, Mackenzie said, testing the repair with his full weight. Better than what you'd get at the saddler in town. Don't tell him that. Man's got to make a living. This time the smile was definite, brief but real. It changed his whole face, softening the harsh angles, making him look younger, making him look. Ella turned away, busying herself with putting away the tools. She had no business noticing how a man looked when he smiled. I've got more leather work needs doing, Mackenzie said carefully. If you're interested, there's a bridle with a broken cheek piece, some halters that are more patches than original. He was offering her work, real work, the kind where skill mattered more than appearances. Ella's hands itched for it even as her practical mind warned against getting comfortable. I won't be here long enough. Storm's not breaking anytime soon. He gestured toward the window, where snow still fell in thick curtains. Might as well be useful while you're stuck. Stuck. Is that what she was? It didn't feel like being stuck, not the way her life in Cheyenne had. This felt like a pause, a breath between what was and what might be. All right, she heard herself say. Show me what needs doing. The rest of the morning passed in leather and thread. Mackenzie brought out piece after piece of tack in need of repair, some his own, some left by ranch hands who'd moved on. Each had its own challenge, its own solution waiting to be found. They developed a rhythm. Mackenzie would assess the damage, cut the leather if needed. Ella would handle the fine stitching, the delicate work of making strong things stronger. He'd set rivets while she planned the next repair, back and forth, a dance of skill and teaching and quiet cooperation.
Where'd you learn all this?
Ella asked as Mackenzie showed her how to soften old leather with Neat's foot oil. The ranch work, the repairs. Here and there. He worked the oil into a stiff halter, bringing it back to suppleness. Army first. They teach you to maintain your gear or do without. Then worked cattle drives for a while. Learned from whoever would teach me. And the ranch. Bought it 5 years ago with my discharge pay and what I'd saved. His hands stilled on the leather. Figured it was time to stop wandering. There was a story there. Ella could tell. Something that had driven a man to seek solitude in this hard, beautiful land. But she didn't pry. Everyone had their reasons for being where they were.
You miss it,
she asked instead.
The wandering.
Mackenzie considered this, hands resuming their work. Sometimes, when the walls feel too close or the silence gets too loud. But mostly, he shrugged. Mostly I'm content. Land doesn't lie to you. Doesn't pretend to be something it's not. You know where you stand.
Unlike people, he didn't say it.
but Ella heard it anyway. She understood. People were complicated, full of hidden motives and expectations. The land just was. "That's the last of it," she said, tying off the final stitch on a set of reins. Her hands ached pleasantly. That good tired that came from honest work. Mackenzie examined each repair with the same careful attention he gave everything. "These'll hold," he said finally. "Better than new. Some of them." "Flattery will get you nowhere," Ella said, but she felt warm at the praise. Not flattery, just truth. He gathered up the repaired tack, each piece testament to what could be accomplished when different skills met and merged. "You've got good hands. Ella, steady, patient. Not everyone does." The way he said her name careful, like he was still getting used to the shape of it, made something flutter in her chest. Dangerous, that flutter. She'd run from one trap only to risk falling into another. But when Mackenzie held up a bridle and asked if she thought they should add an extra keeper to the throat latch, when he listened to her answer with genuine interest, when he modified his technique based on her suggestion, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like respect, like partnership, like two people finding they worked well together despite themselves. The storm howled on, sealing them in their small world of leather and thread and careful cooperation. And Ella, who'd thought she knew all there was to know about mending things, began to wonder if some repairs happened so slowly you didn't notice until they were nearly complete. The storm showed signs of weakening by the third day, though snow still fell steadily beyond the frosted windows. Ella had grown accustomed to the cabin's rhythms, the crack of wood in the fire, the whistle of wind through small gaps in the chinking, the quiet sounds of Mackenzie moving about his home. She'd asked that morning about borrowing fabric to patch her traveling coat, still damp and torn from her flight through the storm. Without a word, he'd led her to a room she hadn't noticed before, little more than a lean-to off the main cabin. The smell hit her first leather and metal and gun oil, stronger here than in the main room. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with supplies. Ammunition boxes sat neat in rows. Leather hides hung from hooks. Coils of rope, boxes of various hardware, tools she couldn't name. And there, on a back shelf, folded fabric and leather pieces. "Help yourself," Mackenzie said, already turning to leave. But Ella's attention had caught on something else. A rifle stock leaned in the corner, the metal parts removed, wood waiting for oil. Above it, a cavalry saber hung on two pegs, its brass guard tarnished with age. Near that, a uniform jacket, blue wool faded to gray, brass buttons still gleaming dully. "You were cavalry," she said, not a question. Mackenzie stopped in the doorway, but didn't turn. "Yes." "How long?" 8 years, enlisted at 17. His voice was carefully neutral, giving away nothing. Ella ran her fingers over a leather hide, thick and well cured, perfect for patches. "That's young to join up." Young and stupid. Thought I was looking for adventure. Now there was something in his voice, not quite bitterness, but close. Found something else instead. She wanted to ask what, but his stance told her the subject was closed. She selected what she needed. Leather pieces, heavy thread, a length of wool that might work for lining. Her fingers brushed against a box as she reached, knocking it askew. Papers spilled out letters. From the look of them. Mackenzie was beside her in an instant, gathering them up, but not before Ella caught sight of feminine handwriting. The name Sarah, signed at the bottom of one. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine." He closed the box, set it back precisely where it had been. Just old correspondence, nothing important. But his hands lingered on the box, and Ella knew a lie when she heard one. Nothing that carefully kept was unimportant. They returned to the main room in silence. Ella spread her coat on the table, examining the damage properly for the first time. 3 tiers from branches or rocks, the hem hanging loose, one pocket nearly ripped away. It would take time to repair properly. She settled into work, aware of Mackenzie's restlessness. He moved from task to task, checking the fire, peering out at the storm, adjusting things that didn't need adjusting. The letters had stirred something in him, some old ghost that wouldn't settle. "Sarah," Ella said quietly, not looking up from her stitching. "That was her name, your sister." Mackenzie went very still. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer, might even ask her to leave despite the storm. Then he sank into his chair with a sound that might have been a sigh. She wasn't my sister." The words came slowly, like he was pulling them from some deep place. We were engaged, before the war." Ella's needle paused. She kept her eyes on her work, giving him the privacy of not being watched. She waited. Mackenzie continued. 4 years of letters, of promises I'd come back, that we'd start that ranch we'd dreamed about. And I did come back, but I wasn't." He stopped, started again. "War changes a man. I came back different, harder." She tried. God knows she tried to find the boy she'd known and what I'd become. "What happened?" "Fever took her. Winter of '67. I was away, hiring on with a cattle drive, trying to save money for that ranch." His voice roughened. "She died alone, waiting for a man who couldn't stand to be in one place anymore, who jumped at shadows and woke up screaming from dreams he couldn't remember." The cabin fell silent except for the pop of the fire. Ella understood now the careful order of everything, the lack of personal touches, the way he held himself apart. He'd built himself a fortress against feeling, against the possibility of failing someone again. "The war," she said carefully. "My cousin came back from Shiloh. He was different, too. Couldn't stand sudden noises. Couldn't sleep in a soft bed. Said it felt like drowning." Shiloh. Mackenzie's voice was grim. "I was at Antietam, Chickamauga. Places that don't make sense even when you're standing in them, seeing what men can do to each other." "Is that why you stay out here away from people?" He considered this. "Partly, it's quiet here. A man can hear trouble coming. And if the dreams come..." He shrugged. "There's no one to disturb." Ella set down her sewing. "That's a lonely way to live." "It's a safe way to live, for everyone." She understood that too. Hadn't she built her own walls? Stitch by stitch, year by year, keeping busy, keeping distant, keeping safe from the kind of pain that came from letting people too close. "I wasn't running from a marriage," she said suddenly. I was, but it was more than that. My father, he owns mines in Wyoming, silver, mostly. The man he chose for me, Cornelius Whitmore. He owns the smelting operation. It was a business merger dressed up as a wedding." Mackenzie made a sound that might have been disgust. Selling daughters like livestock. Exactly like livestock. Bloodlines and breeding potential and financial advantage. The bitterness in her own voice surprised her. 28 years old and never had a say in my own life. Until 3 days ago. That why you ran into a storm that could have killed you? Better to die free than live in a cage. She picked up her needle again, needing the comfort of familiar work. Though I'll admit, when I was freezing out there, the cage started looking better. No, it didn't. She looked up at that, found him watching her with those steady gray eyes. "You wouldn't have fought so hard to get here if any part of you wanted that cage." He said, "I know what giving up looks like. That wasn't it." The certainty in his voice made her throat tight. When was the last time someone had seen her that clearly, had understood without her having to explain? "I was terrified," she admitted. "When I knocked on your door, didn't know what I'd find. What kind of man keeps a welcome sign up in the middle of nowhere?" "What kind indeed." There was that almost smile again. "And now I think you're a man who pays his debts, who keeps his word, who doesn't ask questions he has no right to answers for." She paused, then added quietly, "Who builds walls so high he forgets what's on the other side?" Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, or recognition. "That's a lot to know about a man in 3 days." I'm good at mending things. Remember, you learned to see where the tears are? They sat with that truth between them. Two damaged people recognizing each other across the divide of the small cabin. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to tire itself out, the wind dropping from a howl to a moan. When it clears, Mackenzie said slowly, where will you go? The question she'd been avoiding. Where could she go? Her father would have men watching the trains, the stage routes. She had some money, but not enough to start over properly. I don't know, she admitted. Away. That's as far as I'd planned. Mackenzie stood abruptly, moving to stoke the fire, though it didn't need it. When he spoke, his back was to her. Words addressed to the flames. You mend well. Better than anyone I've seen. Town could use someone with those skills. Mrs. Morrison, who runs the general store. She's been talking about bringing in a seamstress. Might be worth considering. Was he offering her a possibility? A chance at the new life she'd run into the storm to find. Ella's hands trembled slightly as she continued her stitching. That's kind of you to mention. She managed. He turned then, and there was something in his face she couldn't quite read. Not kind, practical. Waste of skill to let you disappear into the territory when there's need right here. Right here, near him, though he'd never say it that way. Near this man who understood walls and wounds and the careful distance necessary for survival, who offered possibilities disguised as practicalities, shelter disguised as simple courtesy. The coat was nearly mended, stronger now where it had been torn. Sometimes, Ella thought, things were better for having been broken and repaired, stronger at the mended places, more valuable for having survived damage. She wondered if the same might be true of people. The evening of the fourth day brought a strange quiet. The wind had finally died, leaving behind a world muffled in white. Stars appeared between breaking clouds, sharp and cold as broken glass against the darkening sky. Ella had finished the last of the mending her own clothes and several more items Mackenzie had found that needed attention. Her hands were tired but satisfied. That good ache that came from useful work. She sat now in the rocking chair, watching him prepare supper with the same methodical care he brought to everything. Storm's breaking, he said unnecessarily. They could both feel the change in pressure, see the clearing through the windows. Be able to travel tomorrow, maybe day after. The words sat heavy between them. 4 days of unexpected companionship, of careful conversation and comfortable silences, drawing to their natural end. Ella should have felt relief. Instead, there was an odd tightness in her chest. After supper, venison stew and cornbread, Mackenzie surprised her by taking down an old guitar from hooks on the wall. She hadn't noticed it before, tucked as it was in the shadows near the door. Didn't know you played, she said. Don't, really, not anymore. He ran his fingers over the strings, wincing at their out-of-tune complaint. This was Sarah's. She had a pretty voice. Used to sing while I played. The past tense hung in the air like smoke, but he was tuning the instrument with practiced ease, fingers remembering even if his heart wanted to forget. My mother sang. Ella offered hymns, mostly, but sometimes old songs from her childhood, ballads about lost loves and faithful maidens. You know any? The question surprised her. In 4 days, he'd asked for nothing personal, made no demands on her beyond basic courtesy. But here he was, guitar across his knee, waiting. I might remember 1 or 2, she said carefully. He strummed a few experimental chords, the sound fuller than she'd expected from the old instrument. Then he began picking out a melody, slow and mournful. Ella recognized it after a few bars, The Water is Wide, an old song her mother had loved. Without quite meaning to, she began to hum along. Mackenzie's fingers found the rhythm, supporting without overwhelming. The firelight made everything soft, dreamlike, safe enough, perhaps, to let her voice free. The water is wide, I cannot get o'er, she sang softly, and neither have I wings to fly. Give me a boat that will carry two, and both shall row, my love and I. So, Mackenzie's playing steadied, grew more confident. He knew this song, had played it before. For Sarah, probably in some other life when he'd been young and whole and capable of believing in futures that included another person.
Oh, love is handsome and love is fine,
Ella continued, her voice gaining strength.
and love's a jewel while it is new, but when it is old, it groweth cold, and fades away like morning dew.
She felt more than saw Mackenzie's fingers falter on the strings. This verse hit too close, perhaps, but he recovered, continued playing, and she sang on through verses about ships and storms and the dangers of trusting too much. When the last note faded, they sat in silence. The fire crackled. Outside, snow slid from the roof with a soft thump. The cabin felt smaller somehow, or maybe they'd just moved closer together without noticing. You have a beautiful voice, Mackenzie said quietly. Clear, true. My father hated when I sang, said it wasn't ladylike to be so loud. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. Your father sounds like a fool. The blunt assessment startled a laugh out of her.
He's many things.
Fool might be the kindest. Mackenzie set the guitar aside carefully, leaning it against the wall.
Play something else,
he asked. Something lighter, maybe. They worked through several songs, finding the ones they both knew. Sweet Betsy from Pike made them both smile. Oh, Susanna had Ella improvising verses that grew increasingly absurd. By the time they attempted Camptown races, she was laughing too hard to sing properly.
That's not how it goes,
Mackenzie protested, though his own mouth was twitching.
It is now,
Ella insisted.
The Camptown ladies sing this song, doo-dah, doo-dah. The Camptown racetrack's 5 miles long because they got lost on the way.
Terrible, absolutely terrible. But he was smiling fully now, the expression transforming his face. He looked younger, easier, like the man he might have been if war and loss hadn't carved those deep lines around his eyes. You should do that more, Ella said without thinking.
Do what?
Smile. It suits you. The smile faded, replaced by something more uncertain. He looked at her long and steady, firelight catching the gray of his eyes and turning them to silver. Ella, he said, and her name in his rough voice did things to her insides she didn't want to examine. I need to say something. Her heart stuttered. Was this it? The moment when the careful balance they'd maintained would tip one way or the other. These days, having you here... He stopped, started again. I'd forgotten what it was like, having someone to talk to work beside, to... He gestured helplessly at the guitar, the space between them that had somehow grown so small.
I know,
she said softly, because she did. These 4 days had shown her something she hadn't known she was missing. Not just shelter from the storm, but shelter of a different kind. The kind that came from being seen, being valued for what you could do rather than what you represented. I'm no good for anybody, Mackenzie said roughly. Got too many ghosts, too many rough edges. A woman like you deserves better than a broken-down soldier hiding from his own shadow. A woman like me, Ella felt her spine straighten. You mean a woman who ran from her own life, who's got nothing but the clothes on her back and hands that know work, that kind of woman? A woman who brings music back to a place that forgot what it sounded like. His voice dropped lower. Who makes broken things whole? Who isn't afraid of the dark? The cabin felt airless suddenly. Ella stood, needing distance, movement, anything to break the spell of his words. She moved to the window, staring out at the star-scattered sky. I can't, she said to the glass. I ran from one trap. I can't fall into another, no matter how... She stopped, unable to finish. I'm not asking you to. Mackenzie's voice came from directly behind her. When had he moved? I'm just saying, if you stayed, if you took that job in town,
If you needed a place while you got settled, the cabin's here. I'm here. No expectations. No traps. Just maybe not alone anymore. Either of us. She turned then, found him closer than expected. Close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat, the careful hope in his eyes. This man who'd armored himself in solitude, offering to crack that armor just enough to let her in.
I don't know how to do this,
she whispered.
Any of this. I only know how to run.
Then don't run. Not yet. Stay until the road's clear properly. Think about it. That's all I'm asking. His hand lifted, hesitated, then barely brushed her cheek. The touch was light as falling snow, there and gone, but it burned like a brand. All right, she heard herself say, until the road's clear. He stepped back, giving her space again, but something had shifted between them. Some careful wall had cracked. They spent the rest of the evening in their separate chairs, him whittling a piece of wood into nothing particular, her pretending to read one of his few books. But awareness hummed between them like a plucked guitar string, vibrating with possibility. The storm was over. What came next was uncharted territory for both of them. When Ella finally retreated to the bed, she lay awake listening to Mackenzie bank the fire, check the locks, settle into his makeshift bed by the hearth. His breathing eventually evened into sleep, but she remained wakeful, staring at the ceiling and wondering if staying might be the bravest thing she'd ever done, or the most foolish. Outside, the stars wheeled on, indifferent to human hopes and fears. But inside the cabin, two wounded souls had found something unexpected in each other. Not love, not yet. That would take time. Trust, careful tending. But possibility. And for now, that was enough. The fifth night arrived with a crystal clarity that only came after storms. The temperature had dropped sharply, turning the snow to a hard crust that glittered like diamonds under the moon. Inside the cabin, the fire burned steady, but there was a different kind of chill in the air, the awkwardness that followed revelations, confessions, possibilities named but not claimed. Ella had spent the day helping Mackenzie with indoor tasks, aware of every accidental brush of hands, every shared glance that lasted a heartbeat too long. The ease they'd found in working together was still there, but threaded through with something new, something that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts scatter. As evening fell, she found herself standing before the bed where she'd slept these past nights, knowing that tonight felt different. Tonight, with the storm past and choices hanging in the air, the bed seemed to represent more than just shelter. It was Mackenzie's bed, in Mackenzie's home, and sleeping in it while he took the floor had begun to feel wrong.
I can sleep by the fire tonight,
she said, not turning to look at him. You should have your bed back. Your back must be aching from all these nights on the floor. My back's survived worse. His voice came from near the table where he was cleaning his rifle, a nightly ritual she'd grown accustomed to. You need proper rest.
So do you.
She turned then, finding the courage to meet his eyes. It doesn't seem right, taking your bed while you sleep on boards. Mackenzie's hands stilled on the rifle. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition of what she was really saying. The careful distance they'd maintained was becoming harder to justify, harder to want. What are you suggesting? He asked quietly. Heat flooded her cheeks. I'm saying the floor's cold, and we're both grown people who've survived worse than sharing space. The bed's big enough, and I trust you. The last words came out in a rush. You said you wouldn't touch me, and I believe you, but I won't have you suffering when there's room enough for both. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken implications. This wasn't about practicality, and they both knew it. This was about trust, about the walls they'd each built and whether they were ready to lower them, even a little. Ella, her name was almost a sigh. You don't know what you're offering.
Don't I?
She lifted her chin, finding a spark of the courage that had sent her into the storm. I'm offering to share a bed for warmth and rest, nothing more, unless... Unless... The word hung between them like a challenge. Ella took a breath, stepped closer to where he sat. Unless someday, when we know each other better, when we're both less broken, we might want it to mean more. But not tonight. Tonight, I'm just tired of watching you hurt yourself to protect my reputation. There's no one here to judge us. Just us in the cold. Mackenzie set the rifle aside with exquisite care. When he stood, he moved slowly, giving her time to reconsider. You're sure? I've been unsure of everything in my life except this. You're a good man. Daniel Mackenzie. Better than you think you are. And I'm tired of both of us pretending we don't feel. Whatever this is. What is this? The question seemed pulled from him against his will. Ella considered her words carefully. I don't know yet, but when I sang tonight and you smiled, when we work side by side and our hands know just how to move together, when you look at me like I'm more than what I can do or who I can marry, it feels like something I want to understand better. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention, and took her hand. His thumb traced the calluses on her palm, the marks of a life spent working. These hands, he said softly, deserve gentleness, deserve someone who hasn't forgotten how to give it. Maybe, Ella said, her voice barely above a whisper, we can remember together. The word together seemed to break something in him. He pulled her closer, not intimately, just near enough that she could feel his warmth, smell the leather and wood smoke scent of him. If we do this, he said, share the bed, share. Whatever else comes, I need you to know I'm not good at it anymore. Being close to people, trusting. I'll make mistakes. So will I. She squeezed his hand. I've spent so long running. I don't know how to stand still, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we can make our mistakes together too. He laughed then, soft and wondering. You make it sound simple. It is simple. It's the fear that makes it complicated. They prepared for bed with a new awareness, careful not to watch each other too openly, but unable to completely look away. When Ella slipped under the quilts on one side of the bed, her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he must hear it. Mackenzie extinguished the lamps, leaving only the fire's glow. She felt the bed dip as he settled on the other side, careful to leave space between them. They lay in the flickering darkness, both rigid with awareness. I can hear your heart racing, he said after a moment, and there was gentle humor in his voice. Scared. Terrified, she admitted. But not of you, of this, of wanting something I don't know how to have. I know the feeling. They lay quiet for a moment. Then Ella spoke into the darkness. Tell me something. Something about before, when you weren't afraid. Mackenzie was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I had a dog once, before the war. Stupid yellow mutt. Showed up at our farm half-starved. Fed him once and he never left. Called him Biscuit because that's all he'd eat at first. What happened to him? Gave him to Sarah when I enlisted. Figured he'd keep her company while I was gone. His voice roughened. He was still there when I came back, old and gray. But he remembered me. Slept by my feet every night until I couldn't stay anymore. Left him with Sarah when I took that first cattle drive. He was gone when I came back, and she was... He stopped, cleared his throat. Haven't had a dog since. Figured it wasn't fair, making something depend on me when I couldn't even depend on myself. Ella's hand found his in the darkness, their fingers intertwining. Maybe depending on each other is different, stronger. Maybe. She could feel him relaxing incrementally, the rigid tension leaving his body. Her own heartbeat was settling, fear replaced by something warmer, safer. Ella, his voice was drowsy now. I'm glad you knocked on my door. So am I, she whispered. Sleep was creeping up on her when she heard him say, so quiet she almost missed it. For the first time in years, so am I. She squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back. They fell asleep like that,
Hands clasped across the careful space between them. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even much, by most standards. But for two people who'd forgotten how to trust, how to hope, how to imagine futures that included another soul, it was more than they'd ever thought to have again. Outside, the cold stars wheeled overhead, and the snow-covered land stretched endless and pristine. Inside, two hearts beat in gradually synchronizing rhythm, learning the first notes of a song they'd write together, one careful verse at a time. The bed was warm. The night was quiet. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither Ella nor Mackenzie felt alone. The morning sun transformed the landscape into something from a fairy tale, all crystal and light. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a world remade. Ella stood at the window, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered plains pink and gold, aware of Mackenzie moving about behind her, starting the morning rituals that had become familiar. She'd woken to find their hands still clasped, his face peaceful in sleep in a way it never was during waking hours. The intimacy of it, not physical but emotional, had sent her slipping from the bed to compose herself. "Roads should be passable in a day or two," Mackenzie said, handing her a cup of coffee. His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught the question underneath.
Yes,
she agreed, equally careful.
I suppose they will be.
They moved through breakfast with the politeness of strangers, the ease of the past days replaced by an awareness that decisions needed making. The outside world, held at bay by the storm, was reasserting itself. Ella was drying the dishes when she made her choice.
I'd like to go to town today, to speak with Mrs.
Morrison about that seamstress position. If the offer to borrow a horse stands. Mackenzie's hand stilled on the harness he was mending.
Of course, though the snow's still deep. Might be better to wait.
I've waited 28 years to make my own choices. Ella interrupted gently.
I don't want to wait anymore.
He nodded slowly. I'll saddle Dusty for you. He's steady, knows the route. A pause. Then, I could ride with you, make introductions. The offer hung between them, weighted with meaning. Going together, making introductions, it would be a public declaration of sorts. The town would talk, draw conclusions.
I'd like that,
Ella said, and watched something ease in his shoulders. The ride to Cedar Hollow took 2 hours through the snow-muffled landscape. They rode side by side when the trail allowed, Mackenzie pointing out landmarks, sharing stories of the land. His voice was different out here, more relaxed, as if the open sky lifted some invisible weight from him. The town appeared like a collection of toys arranged in the snow, a main street, a few cross streets, buildings of wood and occasional brick huddled together against the vastness of the plains. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Ella could see people moving about their business, life continuing despite the storm. That's Morrison's, Mackenzie said, indicating a 2-story building with large front windows. Mrs. Morrison's a fair woman. Lost her own daughter a few years back. She'll appreciate your skills. They dismounted outside the store, and Ella noticed curtains twitching in nearby windows. Their arrival together was already being noted, catalogued, discussed. Mrs. Morrison proved to be a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and work-worn hands. She looked from Mackenzie to Ella with interest that she politely tried to hide.
Daniel,
she said warmly.
Haven't seen you in town for weeks, and this is
Ella Grace, Mackenzie supplied.
She's new to the area, looking for work, best seamstress I've ever seen.
The praise, simple and direct, warmed Ella more than it should have. Mrs. Morrison's eyes sharpened further.
Is that so?
Well, Miss Grace, why don't you show me what you can do? She produced a torn shirt from behind the counter.
This is my husband's. Caught it on a nail yesterday. Let's see how you handle it.
Ella took the shirt, examined the tear. A tricky L-shaped rip that would need careful attention to repair invisibly. She was aware of Mackenzie watching as she threaded a needle. Found her rhythm. made tiny stitches that drew the fabric together like it had never been torn.
"My lord, Mrs." Morrison breathed when Ella finished. I can't even see where the tear was."
"I can also make new garments," Ella said, emboldened by the approval. "Alterations, fancy work if needed. I've worked with all kinds of fabric." "Where did you train?" "My mother taught me young. I've been taking in work since I was 16. "True enough, if incomplete." "Mrs." Morrison glanced at Mackenzie, who stood quiet but solid beside Ella, his presence a silent endorsement. "I've been looking for someone to help with the sewing work. The town's growing, and my eyes aren't what they were. I could offer a small wage plus commission on pieces. There's a room upstairs you could rent, if you're needing a place. A job, a room, a new life, offered as simply as that." Ella's throat tightened.
"That's very generous, Mrs.
Morrison.
"Generous nothing. It's good business. When can you start?"
Ella looked at Mackenzie, found him watching her with that steady gray gaze. "I need a few days to arrange things. Would Monday be acceptable?" "Monday's fine, Mrs." Morrison smiled then, a knowing look that said she understood more than was being spoken. "It'll be good to have another woman around who knows her way with a needle. Gets lonesome, working alone." They concluded the arrangements, Ella's head spinning with the speed of it all. As they stepped back onto the street, she felt Mackenzie's hand at her elbow, steadying. "That went well," he said quietly. "Almost too well. She barely asked about my background. She knows good work when she sees it, and—" He hesitated. "My word carries some weight here. People know I don't speak up lightly." The implications of that he'd vouched for her, put his reputation behind hers, made her chest tight. They retrieved their horses, but before mounting, Ella caught his sleeve.
"Mackenzie Daniel."
"What you did in there was nothing more than truth-telling," but his eyes were soft as he looked down at her. "Are you thinking of taking it, the position?"
"I'd be a fool not to. It's everything I need. Work, independence, a chance to build something."
She paused, then added quietly,
"Close enough to visit the ranch,
if visitors would be welcome." His hand covered hers on his sleeve.
"Ella, you'd always be welcome, but I need you to understand if you stay, if we continue this, whatever this is, people will talk, make assumptions. I don't want you to feel obligated."
"I'm not running," she interrupted. "Not from the talk, not from you, not anymore. I've spent my whole life letting other people's expectations drive my choices. I want to make this choice for myself." They stood there in the bright winter sun, two people on the edge of something neither fully understood, but both were beginning to want. Around them, the town went about its business, pretending not to notice the couple standing close beside their horses, hands touching, futures aligning. "All right then," Mackenzie said finally. "Monday it is. I'll bring the wagon. Help you get settled." "I don't have much to settle." "Then we'll get what you need." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Ella, I want you to know taking this job, living in town, it doesn't have to mean anything more than that. We can be whatever we are, at whatever pace feels right." "I know." And she did. This man who'd learned caution the hard way wouldn't rush anything. Neither would she. But the possibility was there, growing stronger with each shared glance, each careful touch. "We have time now. That's all that matters." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable quiet, plans forming, hope building. The sun was high and warm despite the snow, and Ella felt something inside her unfurling like a flower seeking light. She had work. She had a place. She had a man who looked at her like she was worth patience, worth waiting for, worth the risk of trying again. At the ranch, as they unsaddled the horses, Mackenzie said quietly, "You know, I never thanked you." "For what?" "For knocking on my door, for staying, he gestured helplessly, for reminding me there's more to life than just surviving it.
Ella stepped closer, reached up to touch his face. He went very still, but didn't pull away. We saved each other, she said simply. That's what people do when they're meant to find each other.
Meant to. There was wonder in his voice, and doubt, and hope all tangled together.
Why else would I ride straight to your door in a storm that could have killed me? Why else would you open it without question?
She let her hand drop but held his gaze.
I'm not running anymore. Daniel, I'm building, and I'd like to build something near you. With you, if you'll let me.
His answer was in his eyes, in the way he caught her hand and held it, in the smile that transformed his weathered face into something young and alive and full of possibility. Monday would come. She'd start her new life in town, but she'd carry this with her, this man, this place, this chance at something real and lasting. The storm had brought her to his door, but choice would keep her close. And that, Ella thought as they walked together toward the cabin, was the beginning of everything. 3 weeks had passed since Ella started working at Morrison's. She'd settled into the room above the store, a small but clean space with a window overlooking the main street. Her days were filled with the familiar rhythm of needle and thread, the satisfaction of creating and mending. The townspeople had accepted her with a cautious warmth typical of frontier communities waiting to see if she'd last, if she'd prove worthy of their trust. Mackenzie visited twice a week, bringing supplies to Morrison's and always finding a reason to linger. Their courtship, if it could be called that, was progressing with the same careful patience that marked everything about him. Shared meals at the small cafe, walks along the creek when weather permitted, quiet evenings in her room with him reading while she sewed, building something slow and steady and real. Which made the rider who appeared on Main Street that Thursday afternoon all the more jarring. Ella saw him through the store window, a man in a dark coat on a bay horse, moving with the purposeful air of someone with specific business, her hands stilled on the dress she was hemming, ice forming in her veins. She knew that coat, that horse, that ramrod-straight posture. Thomas Hartley, her father's foreman and enforcer. She stepped back from the window, heart hammering. He hadn't seen her yet, was still surveying the street with methodical patience, looking for her. After 3 weeks, her father had finally tracked her down. Miss Grace, Mrs. Morrison's voice from the back room. Could you help me with... She stopped, seeing Ella's face. Child, what's wrong? You've gone white as flour. Ella's voice came out strangled. She cleared her throat, tried again. I need to step out for a moment. Personal matter. Without waiting for a response, she slipped through the back door into the alley. Her mind raced. Mackenzie was at the ranch. Too far to help. She could run, but where? And she was tired of running. This was her home now. Her life. She wouldn't let her father's reach destroy it. The alley led to the livery stable. Maybe she could borrow a horse. Get word to Mackenzie somehow. But as she rounded the corner, Hartley was there, dismounting with calm efficiency. Miss McCallan, he said, touching his hat with mocking courtesy. Your father's been worried sick. I doubt that very much. Ella lifted her chin, refused to back away. How did you find me? Wasn't hard. Woman matching your description, working as a seamstress, known to be friendly with a local rancher. His smile was cold. Your father has resources. Miss, now, I'm here to bring you home. We can do this easy or hard. I'm not going anywhere with you. Your father disagrees. You're not married, which means you're still under his authority. The law's clear on that. He stepped closer. Mister, Whitmore is still willing to proceed with the marriage. Very understanding man. Your father's prepared to be lenient about your adventure. Lenient, anger flared, burning away the fear. I'm 28 years old. Mr. Hartley, I make my own choices now. Not according to Wyoming law. You don't... Now, I've got a buggy waiting at the hotel. You can come willing, or
or I can make a scene. Drag you out of that nice store. Let the whole town see what kind of woman they've been harboring. Your choice." The threat was clear. Her reputation, the life she'd built, all could be destroyed with a few well-placed words. Runaway daughter, defying her father, living unchaperoned, spending time with a bachelor rancher, in a small town. Reputation was everything. "I need to gather my things," she said quietly. Hartley's smile widened. "Sensible. I'll wait here. 10 minutes. Miss McCallan, don't make me come looking." Ella walked back toward the store on unsteady legs, mind frantically searching for options. She couldn't go with him, but she couldn't let him destroy what she'd built either. As she reached the back door, a familiar figure rounded the corner from Main Street. Mackenzie. He must have finished his errands early, come to walk her home as he sometimes did. His eyes found hers, read the distress there, and his whole body changed soldier alert, ready for threat. She moved to him quickly, gripping his arm. "Daniel, there's a man, my father's foreman. He's come to take me back." Mackenzie's jaw tightened. "Where?" "The livery. He's waiting. He says—" Her voice broke. "He says he'll ruin my reputation if I don't go. Tell everyone I'm a runaway, that we've been—" She couldn't finish. "Stay here." His voice was granite hard. "Go inside. Lock the door." "Daniel, no. He's dangerous. My father wouldn't send someone who wasn't—" "I've faced dangerous men before." He touched her cheek, gentle despite the fury in his eyes. "Trust me. Go inside." She wanted to argue, but something in his face stopped her. This was the soldier, not the careful rancher. This was the man who'd survived Antietam and Chickamauga. She nodded, slipped inside, but stayed by the window to watch. Mackenzie strode toward the livery with purpose. His duster pushed back to reveal the army colt on his hip. She saw Hartley straighten, reassessing. The two men faced each other, and she could see their mouths moving but couldn't hear the words. Then Hartley reached inside his coat. "No!" The word tore from Ella's throat, but Mackenzie was already moving. His hand blurred, and suddenly his gun was out, steady on Hartley, who froze with his hand still inside his coat. The tableau held for a breathless moment. Then, slowly, Hartley withdrew his hand empty and raised both arms. Mackenzie said something that made the other man's face darken. They exchanged more words, Mackenzie never lowering his weapon. Finally, Hartley turned and mounted his horse. He looked toward the store, seemed to see Ella in the window, and touched his hat again, a promise, not a courtesy. Then he rode out, not hurrying but not lingering either. Mackenzie watched until the horse and rider disappeared, then holstered his gun and walked back to the store. Ella met him at the door, threw herself into his arms without thinking. "What did you say to him?" she asked against his chest. "Told him you were under my protection now, that if he had issue with that, we could settle it here and now." His arms tightened around her. "Also mentioned that I knew some rangers who might be interested in how a Wyoming mine owner's been avoiding federal taxes. Your father's not the only one with resources." She pulled back to look at him. "How could you know that?" A ghost of a smile. "I don't, but men like that always have something to hide. The threat was enough. He'll be back, or my father will send someone else. Then we'll deal with it when it happens." He cupped her face in his hands. "Ella, you're not alone anymore. You have me, you have the town. We protect our own here." "Your own," the words came out shaky. "Mine," he corrected quietly. "If you'll have me. I know we said slow, but—" "Ask me," she interrupted, heart pounding for an entirely different reason now. "What?" "Whatever you're dancing around, Daniel Mackenzie, ask me straight." He took a breath, and she saw the soldier courage it required. "Marry me, not because you need protection, not because of your father or the law, because I wake up thinking of you and go to sleep the same, because these 3 weeks of courting you proper have been the best of my life, because I love you, Ella Grace, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw and perfect. Ella felt tears on her cheeks, tasted salt and joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "Yes, yes to all of it." He kissed her then, there in the alley behind Morrison's store, with the whole town probably watching and gossiping. It was their first real kiss, and it was worth the wait, gentle and fierce at once, full of promise and passion carefully banked. When they parted, both breathing hard, Ella laughed shakily. "Mrs. Morrison's going to have opinions about this. The whole town's going to have opinions." Mackenzie grinned, looking younger than she'd ever seen him. "Let them. I'll marry you tomorrow if the preacher's available." "Tomorrow? Why wait? Your father's man knows where you are now. Best to make it legal before he comes back with reinforcements." Practical and romantic at once. That was her Daniel. "All right, tomorrow. But I'm finishing Mrs. Garrett's dress first. I have a reputation to maintain." He laughed, pulled her close again. "There's my practical Ella. Come on, let's go tell Mrs. Morrison she's about to lose her seamstress to marriage. Though I suspect you'll be back. Can't keep those hands idle." They walked back into the store together, facing whatever came next as they would from now on, side by side, unafraid, building something worth protecting in this wild, beautiful land that had brought them together. Hartley was gone, but not forgotten. The threat remained, but it had brought something into sharp focus. They were done with slow, done with careful. Sometimes love came like a storm, sudden and overwhelming, and sometimes you had to stand and fight for it, protect it, claim it before the world tried to tear it away. Tomorrow, Ella thought, holding tight to Daniel's hand, tomorrow she'd be Ella Mackenzie, and her father could rail all he wanted. She'd found her home, her heart, her match, and she'd fight to keep them all. They married the next morning in the small church at the end of Main Street. Mrs. Morrison served as witness, beaming like a proud mother, while Doc Harrison stood up for Mackenzie. Ella wore her best dress, a deep blue wool she'd mended so carefully that first night at the ranch. Mackenzie had shaved close and worn his Sunday shirt, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Collins began, and Ella felt the words wash over her like a blessing. This was real. This was happening. After years of running from one fate, she was running toward another, one she'd chosen for herself. When Mackenzie slipped the simple gold band on her finger purchased that very morning from the general store, his hands were steady, but she could see the emotion in his eyes. This man who'd lost so much, who'd walled himself away from feeling, was taking this leap with her. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend concluded. "You may kiss your bride." This kiss was different from yesterday's softer, sealing a promise made before God and witnesses. When they parted, Ella saw Mrs. Morrison dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. They'd barely made it out of the church when riders appeared at the end of the street. 3 this time, including Hartley, the man in the center, tall and silver-haired with Ella's own stubborn jaw. Could only be her father. "Well," Mackenzie murmured, "that didn't take long." Jeremiah McCallan dismounted with the careful dignity of a man used to being obeyed. His eyes found Ella, took in her simple dress, the man beside her, the wedding band catching the morning light. "Ella Grace," he said, voice carrying the authority of years of command. "What have you done?" "What I should have done years ago," she replied, lifting her chin. "I've married a good man and made my own life." "This," her father's gaze raked over Mackenzie dismissively. "This broken-down soldier with nothing but a patch of dirt and debts." "Careful," Mackenzie said quietly. The single word carried weight, promise, warning. McCallan ignored him, focusing on Ella. "The marriage can be annulled. You were coerced, clearly, under duress. Come home now, and we'll sort this out properly." "The only coercion I've ever faced was from you." Ella stepped forward, feeling Mackenzie's steady presence at her back. 28 years of being told what to do, Who to be, who to marry. It ends now.
You're my daughter.
I'm his wife. She held up her hand. The ring catching sunlight. Legal and binding. Your authority over me ended the moment I said I do.
McCallan's face darkened. You think this ranch rat can provide for you? You'll be mending clothes and scraping by while Cornelius would have given you everything.
Everything but respect, everything but love, everything but the right to be myself. Ella felt tears threaten but refused to let them fall. I have everything I need now.
Love,
her father laughed, harsh and bitter. You threw away your future for love. You'll be crawling back within a year. Mark my words. When you're tired of poverty, of struggle, of this hard life you've chosen, then I'll struggle beside my husband. Ella said firmly, I'd rather have one day of choosing my own path than a lifetime in your gilded cage. The street had filled with townspeople, drawn by the confrontation. They stood in small groups, watching, waiting. These people who'd begun to accept her, who bought her services and shared their gossip and recipes, her new community. McCallan seemed to notice the crowd for the first time. His jaw worked as he calculated odds. Options. A man used to having his way, facing a situation where money and threats held no power. This isn't over, he said finally. When you come to your senses, it is over. Mackenzie spoke up, moving to stand beside Ella, his hand finding hers. Your daughter made her choice. Respect it and leave, or don't and face the consequences. But either way, you're done here. You dare threaten me. I dare defend my wife. Mackenzie's voice was steady as granite. Something you should have done, instead of trying to sell her to the highest bidder. The two men stared at each other, wills clashing in the dusty street. Around them, the town watched, and Ella could feel the shift in atmosphere. They were with her, with them. She wasn't alone anymore. Finally, McCallan turned to his horse. You've made your bed. Ella Grace, lie in it. Don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. My name is Ella Mackenzie now, she called after him. And I'll build my life with my own hands, stitch by stitch, choice by choice. Something you never understood the value of making something yourself, instead of taking what others built. Her father mounted without another word, jerked his horse around harder than necessary. Hartley lingered a moment longer. That same mocking tip of his hat, that same promise of future trouble. Then they were gone, dust settling in their wake. The crowd began to disperse, several women stopping to congratulate Ella, men shaking Mackenzie's hand. Support offered quietly but firmly, the frontier way of showing solidarity. When they were finally alone again, Ella sagged against her husband. Do you think he'll really leave us be? No, Mackenzie said honestly. But he'll find we're harder to move than he thinks. The town's with us, the law's with us, and I'll be damned if I let him take you from me now. They walked slowly toward the wagon Mackenzie had brought to town, loaded with Ella's few possessions from her room above the store, their wedding day. Unconventional as it was. But then, nothing about their story had been conventional. A storm. A door opened to a stranger. Two broken people finding they fit together in ways neither expected. As Mackenzie helped her onto the wagon seat, Ella caught his hand. I have no regrets, she said softly. Not one. That storm brought me to you, and I'd ride through 1,000 more to find this again. His smile transformed his weathered face. My practical Ella, going romantic on me. Your wife, she corrected. I can be both practical and romantic. I contain multitudes. He laughed, the sound rich and full in the morning air. That you do. Come on, Mrs. Mackenzie. Let's go home. Home. The word had never sounded so sweet. The ranch looked different somehow as they approached. Maybe it was knowing it was hers now too. Not just a shelter from the storm, but a place to build a life. The cabin that had seemed small and isolated that first night now looked cozy, welcoming. That evening, as Ella prepared their first meal as husband and wife, she found herself humming.
Mackenzie sat at the table. Cleaning his rifle, old habits died hard, but watching her more than his work. "What?" she asked, catching his stare. "Just thinking how different it all is. Week ago, this place was just walls and work. Now it's home. Real home. Because you're in it." She crossed to him, let him pull her onto his lap, his arms circling her waist. "We'll make it good, won't we, this life we're building?" "We'll make it ours," he promised. "Hard work and honest love and no one telling us who to be except ourselves." Outside, night was falling over the endless prairie. Stars began to appear, same stars that had witnessed her desperate flight. Their meeting, this unlikely love story written in thread and leather and trust. "The storm's over," Ella said softly, looking toward the window. "No more running, no more hiding, no more being alone," Mackenzie added, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I won't let go. Ella, not ever. You knocked on my door that night, and you knocked down every wall I'd built. I won't build them again." "Promise." "I promise. We face whatever comes together. Your father, hard times. Whatever the world throws at us. Together." She turned in his arms, framed his face with her work-worn hands. This good man who'd opened his door to a stranger, who'd given her shelter and then his heart, who'd stood between her and her past without hesitation. "I love you, Daniel Mackenzie," she said simply. "Thank you for not letting go." "Thank you," he replied, "for holding on." They kissed there in their kitchen, in their home, in the life they'd chosen and would build day by day, stitch by stitch. Outside, the wind sang across the prairie, but it was a gentle song now, a lullaby instead of a threat. The storm had passed. What remained was love, steady and strong as good stitching, ready to hold through whatever weather lay ahead. And in a cabin on the edge of nowhere, two hearts that had found their way to each other settled into the rhythm of a life shared. A future chosen, a love that would not let go. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Ella and Daniel's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Please share in the comments where you're listening from. I love connecting with listeners from around the world and hearing your thoughts about the story. If you enjoyed this tale of storm-crossed lovers finding their way to each other, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these frontier romances. Your support means everything and helps me continue bringing these historical love stories to life. Until next time, partners.